We're throwing off the filters of tradition and culture to discover what the Bible really says about our relationships. Relationships with God, with ourselves, and with others. Welcome to this episode of Relationship Truth Unfiltered.
Welcome. I'm Leslie Vernick here with Karl Benzio. He's the co-founder and chief psychiatric officer of Honey Lake Clinic, and he's the medical director of the American Association of Christian Counselors. In addition to being a board-certified psychiatrist, Karl is an international speaker, consultant, writer, and Christian who combines psychiatric science using biblical principles. He's passionate about helping patients find healing with an integration of faith and science. And Karl is a dear friend, someone I want to introduce you to so you can benefit from his incredible wisdom. So thank you, Karl, for being here.
Hey, Leslie, thanks a lot for having me and look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, we go way back. I'm going back to Pennsylvania next week for an event that I'm speaking at, and that's where we first met. And I still have my pictures of Iraq, and I still have very fond memories of us going there to really help the Iraqi people. And I wonder if you ever stayed in touch with any of those people.
Back a few years ago, like maybe 4 years ago, was the last time I had contact with Yosef and Ishbel, but not since though. Yeah.
Yeah, Karl, I've heard your personal story, but I think our audience would love to see how God can redeem big mistakes in magnificent ways. Would you share a little bit about what you went through?
Sure. Yeah. Ever since I was a little kid, 5 years old, I was very interested in decision making. God laid decision making on my heart. That's what I wanted to do, is help people with decisions. Part of that was just curiosity. I'm sort of a why person, always asking why. But part of it was I was a kid with a pretty bad stutter, had a significant lisp. Pretty bright though, and I was started kindergarten when I was 4. But I went to a third grade class for reading, and in that class, I got bullied a lot, got called names, got hit in the back of the head to get my words out, pushed around, people interrupting me, calling me stupid, and a whole bunch of other different things. And it was obviously really hurt, and was wondering, why do they make those kind of decisions? And at home, some stress at home. My parents were young when they got married. I was born 9 months later, sort of immature and just as adults, and immature in their faith, but good people, loving people. But there were some difficulties in their marriage and our home. In second grade, my Sunday school teacher said, um, if you had one wish, what would you wish for? And we went around the room, and I wished for peanut butter milkshakes and baseball cards. But she said, there's a place in the Bible where God grants a wish. And we're like, wow, this is like blasphemy. And she told us the story of Solomon and how Solomon wished for wisdom, or as she said, to be a godly decision maker. And that was really impressed in my head. But as I grew, we moved around a lot. So you start school, make friends, leave friends, make friends, leave friends. Started to grow in anxiety, depression. I was very good in sports, and so I was able to get into that sort of group, but not quite in that inner circle. And that always sort of resonated with me, and felt left out and felt rejected. And as I got into high school, a lot of pressure. I don't even remember some of the great, a lot of athletic accolades and performances, and did things on a national level, but I don't even remember most of them, just because I was so anxious in the midst of it, because I just felt so much pressure. To relieve the pressure, I turned to drugs. Alcohol was my significant drug of choice, pornography, some gambling, a lot of inappropriate behaviors. I was able to get into college at Duke University, majored in biomedical engineering to try to, understand decision making more clearly. But I lost a baseball scholarship. I lost an Air Force ROTC scholarship. I got caught cheating in a math test and got put on academic probation. Almost flunked out of college. God just gave me the gift of test taking, so I was able to score well on the MCATs, but I didn't get into the medical schools that I wanted, that I was desiring, because of my poor grades. So got put on the waiting list at my home medical school in New Jersey, and about 2 days before the semester started, on the waiting list, not in, and I get a call from the registrar's office, and she says, "It's a miracle, Karl." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, we've never gotten this low on our waiting list before, but we got to your number. Would you like to still come to medical school?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's all I've ever wanted to do, is to be a psychiatrist, to help people with their decision-making skills." So I get into medical school, and I thought at that time, wow, all the things I'm doing are working, so I can just continue to do the things that I'm doing. Well, in medical school, things continued to spiral. My drinking increased, and ended up with DUI and with 6 counts of aggravated assault and 6 felony charges, and ended up in jail. And it was in jail where God spoke to me and said, and not audible voice, I've never heard his audible voice, unfortunately, but in my spirit, he spoke and said, "Karl, You made me your savior when you were a little kid. And I did. I answered many an altar call. I mean, I didn't want to burn in hell forever. But he said, you never made me the Lord of your life. If you make me the Lord of your life, I'm going to teach you things about decision making that are going to renew your mind, transform your life, and help you transform other people's lives as well. And when I heard that, I heard Lord, I heard authority. When I heard authority, I heard author. And I realized that I had thought that I was the most qualified person to write the How Does Karl Get the Most Out of Life instruction manual. I loved me more than anybody loved me. I cared for me more than anybody cared for me. I knew me more than anybody else knew me. I knew my sins. I knew my mistakes, my weaknesses, my future, my goals, my gifts. So I was the one by far most qualified to write that instruction manual. How does Karl get the most out of life? But when I heard Lord, authority, author, I realized he is my designer, designed me in a very intricate, specific way. And he gave me an instruction manual. This is how you get the most out of life. And he's the one most qualified to write that instruction manual. And so it was that I started to get into the Bible, reading Jesus' decisions, thinking he's the perfect decision maker. So if I want to learn about decision making more, let me study his decisions and put that with my psychiatric science and medical school learning. And over about a 4-year period, through therapy, God brought a great woman into my life, stopped drinking, gave me 3 wonderful girls that brings out the softer, gentler side of me, and a lot of anger and frustration and pride and control issues subsided. And God has just led me on an incredible journey, given me a tremendous opportunity. And I would just encourage everybody out there that God has an incredible comeback story for everybody. And we just need to be willing to have that as our story and not to try to write our own story, because we're not the qualified person to be able to write that story.
It's an amazing story. And, you're a psychiatrist and a Jesus lover, and those often don't go together. So how do those two mindsets, the science, the, understanding all of this stuff medically, biologically, and then Jesus has something to say about the way we work and the way we think and our mindset. How does that go together for you?
Yeah, so I often get the question, Karl, you're a biomedical engineer, you're a medical doctor, you're a psychiatrist, very science oriented. How in the world are you a Christian? And on the Christian side, I hit, hey, you're Karl, you're a Jesus lover, you love God, you love the Bible. How can you be a scientist? So both sides have a hard time understanding the opposite side, as you run into this as well. And to me, they're very intricately woven. I mean, God is an incredible designer. He is very particular and specific with our laws of our universe and thermodynamics and physics and gravity, but also health design laws that he's designed into us for health, physical health as well as psychological health. And so they go together. As we look at Jesus, Jesus is the great physician and the wonderful counselor. Now, if you put those two professionals together, you get a psychiatrist. So Jesus is the perfect psychiatrist. And he gives us, like any good clinician, has a healing prescription. And so Jesus gives that to us in Matthew 13, verse 15. He says, if they would see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand in their heart, and turn, I would heal them. Now, as a medical doctor, I don't know of any medical illness that if you do those 4 things, you get healed. But from a psychiatric perspective, I've seen this in my life and many patients' lives and people that we treat here at Honey Lake Clinic. If they would see with their eyes, so if we see clearly, if we see reality, we see the truth, we see ourselves, we see God, we see our situations clearly, then 2, we hear with our ears, we hear God's answer to that situation, whether he speaks to us like he spoke to me, whether it's through his word, whether it's through others, whether it's through a counselor, a pastor, a spouse, a friend, colleague, or our circumstances. And then we have to understand how to connect that answer to the specific situation that we see. But then it's not enough just to understand. Understand is sort of an intellectual understanding and knowledge, but we have to, number 4, turn, meaning we take action, meaning we're willing to trust that answer strongly enough that we put it into action in the form of a decision. And when we do that, when we make a decision applying that answer, we're not just hearers of the word, but doers of the word, then Jesus heals us. And that's what neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is this incredible healing principle that God designed into our mind that allows our brain to change based on the decisions that we make. So the Bible, to me, is the greatest psychiatric textbook. It's a great decision-making text. It obviously has a much bigger story to tell, but as far as our life here on earth, mine birth 1963 till the day I die, it is the great psychiatric textbook telling me, how do I live my life? How do I optimize my life? How do I glorify God and live the abundant life? And it's by following these design laws for health that he shares with us in the Bible. As our designer, anybody who designs something, they don't want to have you guess as to how to get the most out of it. They give you an instruction manual. And so the amazing thing about the Bible is all these psychiatric textbooks that I have in my office, I got, hundreds of them. Within a few years, there's something in them that's wrong. And so they have to be rewritten. But with the Bible is a book written, over a course of 1,500 years by 35 to 40 authors. Now, if you get three psychiatrists in a room, it's really hard to get them in a room to just write a book and have internal consistency and agreement. But the Bible is a book written over 1,500 years by 35 authors with incredible internal consistency that now on SPECT scans and various different studies by Harvard, by Baylor, by Duke are finding, wow, when we integrate biblical truths and principles into our life, our psychological and physical health dramatically improve. And so to me, that's an incredible apologetic for the Bible, being the instruction manual, and how faith and science really integrate in a profound and such fluid way.
I think that's so encouraging, Karl, but I would love for us to get like practical, because I think for our population, for women who are in destructive marriages, oftentimes they feel helpless to make a decision for a number of reasons. One is they're in a destructive marriage and perhaps they're not working and they don't know how they're going to, get out or get safe. Their husband is addicted to something, and so he feels helpless over his rage or over his addictions. The whole Bible, kind of has shaped women to kind of play the helpless role, like my husband is my authority, my husband is my head, I can't make a decision without him making it for me. How would you help a person who has these kind of helpless mindsets grab a hold of the decision making power that God has given each one of us as human beings?
Yeah, to me, that's like the number one divine institution, that God has given us. There's volition or decision making, there's marriage, there's family, there's country. But that one decision making, we often overlook it, and we look at some of the other institutions and establishments God has in the Bible. But He's given us all free will, and He wants us to exercise that free will, and that's that responsibility that we have with Him. And that's we're in an election cycle, and with all this, there's a lot of different legislative struggles and issues, and part of it is this separation of church and state, and this idea that church and state should be separated, and they're not really separated. What our forefathers wanted is that people had the opportunity to decide what their faith is, that the state couldn't institute and say, this is the national religion, because God wants us to have, obviously, He'd like us to follow Him, but He wants to give us freedom of choice. He wants to give us our free will to make decisions. That's what love really is being able to love the person enough that you allow them to make the choices. And so for people that are struggling, that are stuck, we have different elements that invade on that ability to make decisions, whether it's fear, whether it's failure in past decisions and thinking that, wow, just because one variable in the past is the same as the present variable, then all the variables are going to be the same. And I failed in that decision and situation, so I'm going to fail in this situation. Sometimes we think that maybe other people know more than us, and who am I? I don't know very much, and that I'm not an expert in this situation. That other person sounds a lot better. They seem like they know a lot more than me. They seem to have tackled this better than I have in the past, so I'm going to defer to them. Now, when we're trying to make decisions, we obviously don't want to do that in a vacuum. We want to be able to have help. None of us are experts at everything. So trying to figure out where does wise counsel come from in that process of making a decision and gathering data so that we can sort through and be prayerfully considering of what that decision is that honors God and helps us grow and live an abundant, healthy life. But trying to figure out, well, where do our emotions play into that? And unfortunately, we're not taught very well how to manage our emotions. We've been hurt in the past in many ways. And so when things come into our life, situations that mimic or resemble or maybe might lead to that same kind of hurt, boy, we got a lot of emotions that danger, danger, warning, warning, stay away from that. And those emotions really interfere with our ability to see things clearly and therefore to make a good decision. So we end up becoming a lot more emotional decision makers, and emotions are very important, very healthy aspect of who we are, but they're terrible decision makers. And unfortunately, a lot of times, both men and women in various different situations become more emotional decision makers than based on the facts and reality and good counsel. And that's where we really go astray in a lot of different situations.
How would you help someone if they would recognize that's me? I'm a reactor. Somebody pushes my buttons, I react. Somebody pushes my buttons, I react. And so that really is helpless. Like they have power over me because I can't stop myself. I don't have the tools to notice what's happening inside, and I just react. And then later I feel bad, or I regret it, or I made a mess of things, or those kind of consequences. What would be something that you would say to help someone learn to honor their emotions, to recognize their emotions, but not give them decision making power?
Exactly. So, to me, emotions are a great warning system. Whenever I grew up as a boy in the 60s, we were taught that if you were anxious, fearful, jealous, prideful, sad, depressed, that you were weak, you were a wuss, you couldn't handle things, that people would take advantage of you. So we were taught to stuff them down. And most of society, that's what we do, is we stuff feelings, especially those what we call negative ones. I use the term uncomfortable because none of them are negative. They're just uncomfortable or comfortable. But when we're not really taught, well, how to manage, how to be aware of, how to understand those emotions. But they're good things. But what they are is a warning system. So whenever we have those feelings, it's important for us to say, oh, well, thanks, my system, for warning me about a particular situation. Either there's danger, there's something going wrong, or I'm not seeing things clearly. So if my daughter comes to me and says, Dad, I'm angry with you, my response to her is, wow, that's great, honey. I'm glad that your warning system's working. I'm glad you trust your warning system. Glad you're aware of it. You're able to see that, wow, that's not the problem, your anger, because we're often taught that the feeling is the problem. Well, the feeling's not the problem. Just like the smoke detector or that red light on our dashboard, that's not the problem. The problem is the thing underneath it. That's what we're getting warned about. So it's good that we have that warning sign. So for us to be able to start to feel comfortable feeling those feelings, being aware of those feelings, not running from them, not trying to hide them, not trying to push them under the carpet, or not seeing them as the problem, and I'm terrible because I'm depressed or I'm sad here or I'm angry there, but say, well, I'm getting warned about something. Is it because I don't have control of the situation, that somebody's taking away my power? That was for me as a kid. I wanted control. I wanted power. So I had a lot of anger whenever it seemed like I was losing that or somebody else was imposing their control or power over me. It made me very angry, and I would get into fights. I would lash out based on that until I understood that, wow, that's just a warning sign that something's going on. Well, how do I sort of get down deeper below that warning sign to find out, well, what am I actually getting warned about? So trying to be able to look at those uncomfortable feelings from that perspective. And then the second thing would be, usually our first response in a situation is a fleshly response. Our primary motivations in a situation, especially when we're somewhat compromised, is we want maximum pleasure, we want to minimize pain, and we want to conserve energy. And so that fleshly response of survival, is usually detrimental. It's usually not the best option, but it's the first one that pops out. And so to be able to have that self-control over that first impulse and say, let me see if some better ones, as I think through this, as I try to dig a little deeper to find out, well, what are better options in this situation? Whether to seek guidance from somebody, whether to follow counsel, whether to gather more data, ask more questions, whether it's just to take a break, to take a time out, to leave the room, to leave the situation, to leave the interaction. There's a bunch of other options that a person can go to. So to put some control on that initial one, because we can always come back. If my initial option is to punch my boss in the face, well, probably not the best option, going to lead to a whole lot of other. I might feel good for 2 seconds that, well, I've gained control back in a situation, but boy, there's a lot of long-term consequences and ramifications of that. Let me see if I can find better options. If I don't find better options, I can always come back to the first option. If that ended up being the best option, you can always come back to it. Very rarely do you lose that first option, but usually you come up with a lot better options as you have a little bit of self-control over that initial option and some patience to sort through some options. If those are situations that you've been in before, well, how to call upon past experiences about what has worked and what hasn't. If not, how to start journaling or engage with somebody like you or a counselor, a therapist, a coach, somebody who has has shown a good track record, has shown some expertise, has shown a comfort level in handling those situations so they can help guide, coach you, counsel you as to how to do that better. A lot of times, unfortunately, as I did, in my teen years and early adult years, I was seeking guidance from people that had no track record of expertise, but it was the blind leading the blind. I was asking them, hey, what should we do in this situation? Well, they're telling me a stupid, option in the process. So we need to make sure that as we seek out counsel, we seek people that have a track record of expertise in either their personal life or professional abilities to help teach and coach us in those areas.
So many people go from 0 to 10 in less than 5 seconds, in their emotions once they get triggered with whatever that is, anger or fear. And their prefrontal cortex isn't online to really think. They're just reacting in the moment. And so you're asking them to create a space where they have an opportunity to consider their options and can go back to reacting if that's the best option. And sometimes it is the best option. If someone's attacking you, maybe reacting, you don't even want to think, you just run. But I think a lot of times we do have consequences from that first option. And so what can someone do if they're saying, this is me, but I don't know how to get to this thinking place that he's talking about? I am just so in the moment, and I am flooded with fear, I'm flooded with anger, I'm flooded with shutdown, I'm frozen. So what can they do to help themselves buy time?
It can be very sad, very overwhelming to uh, think of, well, how do I get from the pit all the way to the top of the mountain? And we think that we have to make that jump all at once, or else nothing's going to work, or we're a failure. Um, but being able to figure out, well, what are those small little steps in this situation? So, whenever you do one push-up, um, you look in the mirror, you see your physique, you do one push-up, you look in the mirror, wow, no real changes. But microscopically, a lot of things were happening. The tendons, muscles, ligaments, bones, all were getting strengthened. That allowed you to do 2 push-ups the next day, 5 the next weekend, 10 after a couple weeks, 25 at the end of the month. Now, all of a sudden, you look in the mirror and there's incredible macroscopic changes that you observe. So for people that are struggling, it's that one step at a time. How do we just do one thing? How do we move just the needle 1%? Whatever that looks like for each individual. Whether that's just being able to sit down and journal a little bit that night about what happened. Might not have been able to make any changes in the moment, but start to journal, start to think about that situation, start to understand, well, what are my emotions? What were my thoughts? What were the triggers? To be able to give ourselves a fertile ground for that to happen, we want to be able to see if we can have good sleep, see if we can have good nutrition. For our brain to work, it needs the proper raw materials and resources to work. So good diet, good exercise to be able to get blood flowing, whether it's oxygen and nutrients up there, and to get waste products, flowing out of our brain. Sometimes, whenever we're stressed, we use caffeine, we use nicotine, we use alcohol. All those are going to sort of magnify those feelings and emotions and push them out of control, push them to the surface more, to make them more difficult to deal with. And they're also going to interfere with our judgment. So they're really going to escalate the problems in all kind of different areas, interfere with our perception, interfere with our emotion, and heighten the emotional intensity, and interfere with our ability to sort through the options and not be impulsive about a poor option. But it's amazing how many times we're sort of involved in some of those kind of things to help self-medicate or soothe the situation, or we're being so disrupted that we in our daily life and daily functioning, that our stress level is already a 45 out of 50, and then that last couple stressors push us over the top. So trying to figure out, well, how can we have a more stable situation so that we're not pressed over the line so quickly, and to look at it as just one step at a time. It might seem overwhelming, but we usually don't get into these kind of predicaments overnight. They're usually not going to end overnight. So trying to figure out, well, how do I start to develop a nice, healthy strategy for a 1% movement, a 1% movement? And it's amazing how that, compounding interest sort of allows that little bit of investment and 1% movement to really grow pretty quickly into substantial skills and abilities, so that person starts to see macroscopic changes in what they're doing.
I think that's so true. Sometimes we kind of go all in and it's so hard and it's so painful. It's like going to the gym and, working out your heart, and then you can't even get out of bed the next day and thinking, I can't do this. And so those little tiny, I'm going to do 5 reps and see how I feel the next day, and do 5 again the next day. And that is doable. And just one of the things we teach our women to do is just during that trigger, just to pause and breathe, just to take a couple of deep breaths. That helps them give themselves a little bit of space to evaluate versus just, flood themselves with their feelings. They might still have their feelings all flooded, but at least they're breathing during it. So they have a chance to calm that down and think about what they want to do.
Yeah, one thing I give my patients an assignment is, draw up your 10 go-tos. 10 things you can go to when stressed to help you soothe, to help you calm, to bring down that emotional volume. So I think of my brain as having two volume buttons. One's an emotional volume button and one's a thinking volume button. And to me, Jesus is the only one that can have them both cranked at the same time. So if our emotional volume is high, then our thinking volume is going to be low. And so this is why athletes choke, because their emotional volume goes up. So they're not able to think out on the field. They're not able to remember what the play is, what the team is going to run, what the defense is going to do, that they've had success in the past. That's why people forget their lines in a play. That's why they don't let doctors operate on their own kids, because if something went sideways in the surgery, my emotional volume would jack up. I wouldn't be able to think clearly and remember, well, what is the proper procedure? What have I done in past operations in this situation? So to be able to have control of that emotional volume, whenever people feel it start to escalate, obviously the earlier you can catch it, the better. But I have patients write up 10 go-tos, and they can be anything. They could be a favorite Bible verse. They can be a character in the Bible that they resonate. To me, Daniel and Joshua, are two stories that I love. It could be a song, that helps calm them. It could be a past memory of being on the beach or something relaxing, or an accomplishment, or something that they did well in the past, or whenever they, hit it out of the park in this particular situation, something that gives them some self-esteem and some confidence and feels good. But whether it's to rub your vagus nerve right here by your carotid artery is a calming thing. To put a cold cloth behind your neck is calming and soothing. Sometimes to slap your face, slap some water in your face to sort of wake up. Sometimes it's to take a time out. For me, I love pickleball. Pickleball is a great de-stressor for me. But I asked them to put 3 things on that list that they are able to do in their head, that they don't need anybody else, or they don't have to go anywhere else. So in case they're in traffic, or they're on a plane, or they're in a situation that they can't get out of, that in their mind, they can go and call up those things to help bring that emotional volume from an 8 to a 7, 5, 3. We see this in the Psalms, whenever David's, in the cave and he's distressed, he's overwhelmed, I'm going to die. This is it. This is the end. And his emotional volume is at a 10. Saul's men are after him. His own team has fled from him, so he's all alone. But then he starts thinking about God and about his past, and how God sort of protected him with the lion and the bear and the successes that he had, and loves him and cares for him. And all of a sudden, his emotional volume went from a 10 down to a 2 or a 1, and now he's able to think more clearly. And his circumstances haven't changed. He's still in a dank, stinky cave at night with Saul chasing him. His men are still scattered, but now he's at peace, he's joyful, he's content, and he's thinking clearly about what is his next strategy he needs to do to deal with the situation at hand.
Sadly, we don't teach this very well in churches or in families. And so if you're a grown-up here and you're listening and you're saying, oh my gosh, I never heard this before and I don't know how to do this, don't beat yourself up. It's something that many people don't know how to do, but it's really essential that you learn. And so take these small pieces of information and start putting them into practice, because we are an information society that has more information about more things that we will ever learn or practice, but we still don't function very well. And so take one thing that you're hearing and start practicing it, so it really becomes yours. It really becomes changing in your life.
I think one big thing that our society doesn't teach very well is, there's a huge unconscious space, that we have so much data stored in our unconscious mind, that unconscious space. I call it our essence space, because it reveals the essence of who we are. But the church really doesn't teach about that at all, because the story of Lazarus is a real neat story. Lazarus is sick. Mary and Martha send messengers. Hey, Jesus, look, your buddy's really ill. You need to come back, heal him. You've healed so many people. Jesus is like, well, I'm busy. I got stuff to do. Unfortunately, he comes late. Lazarus is dead for 4 days. And Jesus says, all right, let's roll back the stone. Rolls back the stone. Lazarus, rise, come forth. Lazarus, miracle, raised from the dead. The next thing Jesus says is to the people next to Lazarus, unbind him, because Lazarus had these death wrappings around his face, around his body, that interfered with his sight, his vision, his perspective, interfered with his freedom, his walk, his movement. He didn't tell Lazarus, unbind yourself. He told others to unbind Lazarus, because Lazarus had these death wrappings. From a Christian vantage point, we come into this world spiritually dead. Through the miracle of Jesus and Jesus raising us from the dead through his death on the cross and our belief in him as our Savior, we're raised from spiritual death to spiritual life. We're a new creation. We have new potential. We have a new power source, the Holy Spirit in us. Our sin slate is washed perfectly clean. We're white as snow. But our memory banks aren't washed clean. Nobody gets a brain transplant. So we have all this information, all these experiences, losses, hurts, wounds, distorted perspectives of situations. I certainly had from my childhood so many distortions that, as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 8-year-old, I'm interpreting about life, interactions, people's relationships that were wrong. And so it's like garbage in is garbage out. The more misinformation in our head, then the more wrong decisions and dysfunction we're going to make and produce. And so in the Christian community, I don't think we do a very good job. We just teach people that, hey, you're a new creation. You don't need to know anything about your past. Your past doesn't affect you at all. Just walk in the freedom that Christ has for you. Well, that's why we call it a sanctification process, because there's a lot of things we need to do to be able to move from milk to solid food, to be able to move from psychologically immature or unhealthy to psychologically healthy. And our society doesn't do a very good job of teaching it, but our church community really does a terrible job in encouraging us to avoid looking inward at ourselves and sort of searching and doing some analysis and understanding what's going on in there, because all that stuff in there is producing the decisions. Guard your heart with all vigilance, for out of it flows the wellspring or the decisions of life. And so for people that are listening to be able to start to think about, well, what is inside? What is that information? What are those hurts and wounds? Whenever I make a decision in a difficult situation, and I make a decision that, I'm not pleased with or wasn't a healthy one, let me unpack that decision either on my own and sort of, well, why did I make that decision? What might have been some misinformation that's inside of me, or things I was afraid of, or things that I needed or was afraid of losing that prompted that decision as opposed to a healthier decision. And as we start to unpack that, we start to get a magnifying lens deeper into our heart to be able to look at actionable things that we can start to work on and change. And as we work with a coach or a guide or a counselor, and as we're in our devotional time and we ask the Holy Spirit and God to reveal those things and to show us those things, it was just a monumental thing that occurred in my life. And as I worked with patients over the years, and whether outpatient or in residential situations, it's amazing how the lights turn on when they start to unpack some of that stuff that goes on inside that the church is, I don't want to say called us to ignore, but hasn't encouraged us to look at, in a very clear way.
Friend, if any of this is resonating with you, please listen carefully. Leslie will be offering a totally free workshop on December 5th, where she will answer the all-important how question. Like, how exactly do you take control of your life when you're in what feels like a desperately unfair and impossible situation? If you need more than the usual pull yourself up by the bootstraps or just suffer for Jesus kind of advice, then please go to leslievernick.com/story and register for this free workshop. She's offering it at noon and again at 7:30 Eastern on Thursday, December 5th. This is about you taking control of your story, of realizing you can and showing you how. All you need to do is go to leslievernick.com/story, register, and then put it on your calendar and plan to show up.
When we were in Iraq and recently in Alaska together, you teach something called Spears decision making. Can you unpack that for our audience a bit?
Yeah. So, as I looked at decision making, whenever I was, coming out of jail and trying to, get my life on a much better course, I had all this expertise in decision making from a biochemical standpoint and psychological standpoint, and then reading the Bible. And as I started to implement and understand these emotions and thoughts and stuff better, I came up with this curriculum and this process called Spears. that I used that's the way I dug out. And as I started to implement in various different programs, found great success with. And we make about 400,000 to 600,000 decisions a day. So we make a lot of decisions. But unfortunately, if we're able to sort of see the people that hear this, how many people ever had a class in decision making? We've had English class, we've had math class, we've had science class. But as I've asked this over the years to thousands of people, only 8 people have raised their hand that they had a decision making class between K through 8th grade. Now we teach psychology a little bit in high school, so there's a little bit of information about the brain, but still not an actual decision making class. But it's the most important skill, because whenever God asked Solomon, Solomon, what do you want to wish for? Solomon wished to be a godly decision maker. Now, Solomon came from an incredibly dysfunctional family with, David had 7, 8 wives, and a brother raped a sister, a brother killed a brother's trying to kill dad. But he wished to be a godly decision maker instead of anything else he could have wished for, because it's the most important thing that we have 100% control of. So as I looked to combine that science and what I saw from what the Bible taught, I found that there are 6 elements in every single decision that we make, and they occur in the same order or sequence in every single decision. The first one I call stimulus. So they spell out the word SPEARS, SPEARS. So the first one is stimulus. So stimulus is the situation. So we have situations that occur to us every day. And these things come into our life because God has allowed them to come into our life for various reasons, for various purpose. We take in about 11 million bits per second of stimulus. This is how powerful our mind is, that we're taking in information, but we only take in about 300 bits consciously. All the rest is taken in unconsciously. So all this information is being stored in our unconscious process. The second element is perception. So we have a situation and then we perceive it. And so our lenses, we'd love to have clear lenses, like Jesus said, if we had eyes that see, and if we could see clearly, the truth sets us free. But all of us have smudges in our lenses. We have filters that interfere with our ability to see things clearly, whether it's past hurts, wounds, losses, or just as a 5-year-old, whenever I don't get picked first in dodgeball, well, how do I interpret that? I'm a loser. I'm a failure. I'm never going to have any friends. Nobody's going to like me. Well, nobody taught me that. That's just my 5-year-old way of interpreting situation that's around me. And so I store that in my database, my unconscious space, that comes out to play, and it forms now the smudges or the filters on the lenses that I'm trying to see present day situations in. So after P, there's E for emotion. So a lot of people think that emotions just come out of the blue. Boy, I was just driving down the road and all of a sudden I felt angry, or I was just hanging out at home and I just had this sense of happiness or peace or joy. But every emotion comes because we have a situation that we're in, and then we have a perception of that situation that leads to an emotion. Now, people can see the same exact stimulus, a football game. Let's say I'm a Steeler fan and you live in Arizona, or an Arizona fan. We see the same situation, the same stimulus. The Arizona team scores a touchdown. But being a fan of Arizona, you have a different perception of it, and your emotion is going to be happy. Me being a Pittsburgh fan, seeing Arizona score against my team, I have a different perception of it, and therefore I have a sad or frustrated or angry emotion. So it's not necessarily the situation, but it's really how we see it that determines our emotion. Then from an emotion, we can have a myriad of emotions in a situation, not just one necessarily. Then okay, here's options. Based on this situation, what are my options to figure out, well, how do I maximize pleasure, minimize pain, and conserve energy? So we sort through options, pros and cons of options, and hopefully we're doing it from a biblical perspective or a godly perspective, but oftentimes we're doing it from a me perspective, unless we're training ourselves and learning how do I look at both the situation and then my options from a good, healthy, godly perspective. Then after A, assessment, there's R, response. I pull the trigger on one of the responses, or maybe a combination of responses. And then S is summary thought. And the summary thought, I'm just trying to assess, boy, did that decision work for me? Should I do it in the future? Wow, I yelled at that person, or I lied, or I deceived, or I was people pleasing, or I was just passive and shut up, or I was assertive, or I spoke up, or I asked a clarifying question. Various different options of responses. Is that working for me? So summary thought, should I do that response again in the future? That works, or should I not? Boy, that wasn't a healthy response. So those are the 6 elements: stimulus, perception, emotion, assessment, response, and summary thought. They occur in that order. Perception, assessment, and summary thought are thinking steps. And so, unfortunately, we often just blow by those. Those happen unconsciously most of the time. And the good news is God gave us a powerful mind. The bad news is God gave us a powerful mind. And Satan wants to use that power against us. So instead of um, those being sort of thoughtful steps or taking our time in them, Satan wants us to just blow right through them and let our unconscious and our hurts and our wounds and our losses sort of influence how we see the situation, how we assess our options, and how we, summary thought, wow, I lied and I got away with it and I didn't get any consequences. I should lie more often. Or wow, I was passive and I didn't say anything or didn't do anything. So they didn't argue back, and I didn't have to plead my case, and it saved time, it saved energy. So I should be passive more often. So trying to, as we look at and assess our response, we want to do it with a long-term health in mind, not just a short-term. Wow, I skated by, I didn't have to incur any consequences. Boy, I should do that more often. So the goal is, as patients learn this and practice it, I give them a homework assignment of um, take a take a decision that you made today that didn't work out well, that you'd rather have a rewind button that you could hit and say, boy, I wish I could do that one over again. Well, let's do a psychological autopsy on that, or let's unpack it to see, while it's fresh in our mind, let's look at those 6 elements to see what was going on in my head. Because great athletes, the game slows down for them, or they're able to see a couple steps ahead. And I think successful people that make good decisions, they're able to slow their mind down so they can see a couple steps ahead instead of making a decision and 10 minutes later, oh man, why did I say that? Or why did I do that? Or I can't believe I was thinking that. How do we be a little bit more in the moment? And the more people understand these 6 elements and they start to journal about them, they start to think about them, then in real time, they're like in a situation and they're starting to think about, oh, here's my perception, here's my emotion. And they still might make a wrong decision. But again, as we practice and practice and practice, we're just starting to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, right? Not just our conscious thoughts, but our unconscious thoughts. And this tool, the Spears tool, allows us to, in the moment, be a much better decision maker. But the real gold for me in my life was it helped me see misinformation that I had stored in my unconscious space that was influencing all my decisions on a daily and very regular basis. But I wasn't even aware of some of that misinformation. And as I started to unpack, well, why would I make this decision? Why would I drink when I was going to go to that party? Or why would I drink when I knew I was going to have this performance that a lot was riding on it? And as I started, well, I needed control, I needed power, I was afraid of failure. There was a bunch of things that started to be revealed to me that I really wasn't aware about when I started to do that psychological autopsy. And as we do that over and over, we start to really see some real actionable things in our heart that, wow, now this is making sense. I don't pick the wrong choice because I'm stupid or because I want to do bad things. I pick the wrong choice because there's misinformation in my database that makes the logical option look illogical and makes the illogical option look logical. So Paul wrote in Romans 7, all the good things I want to do, I don't do. The bad things I don't want to do, that's what I keep on doing. Woe be me, wretched man that I am. Who's going to win this battle between the spirit and the flesh within me? And I think Paul was talking about his unconscious mind, that he had trouble understanding what's going on in his unconscious. Even though he knew all this Bible doctrine in his head, he still had trouble executing at times the correct answer or the correct decision in the situation. And we all struggle with that. We're all in this healing process. But until we start to look inside to figure out what is going on and how God designed our mind to work through this Spears decision making process, these are the mechanics of decision making. A lot of times people say, well, let's make better decisions in your marriage, or let's make better decisions as a parent, or let's make better decisions with finances. And to me, that's like starting at domino 15, learning the actual mechanics of decision making. That's dominoes 1 through 14. And once we understand that, then it's a lot easier to make decisions about managing our emotions, managing our body, managing our decisions, managing relationships, finances, parenting, all the other things.
That's so true, Carl. And I think it's really helpful for us as leaders to talk about the daily habits that make that more possible. So self-awareness, if we look in the physical realm, every single day we look in the mirror, we brush our teeth, we take a shower. We don't expect that maintenance work lasts for a whole week. we know that that's something that we have to do daily. And if we didn't do it on a day, we might kind of sniff under our arms or kind of see if, am I okay? And that's okay to do, because as human beings, every day, we're going to need some maintenance and we might need some repairs. And I think in the psychological realm, we've had this misunderstanding as Christians that if we get healthy, we don't have to do that anymore. We're like, good. And we don't have to ever self reflect or self examine ourselves or look in the mirror or take stock of ourselves. And I think if we can get this into the Christian population, is this is normal self maintenance. This is normal self care, not selfish, not self indulgent. It's normal, just like you would brush your teeth twice a day and take a bath every day. This is normal stuff that we need to teach our children to do so that they come to the table in the best possible way they can.
Yeah, you talked earlier, like what can people do, right, to start to implement? And this is exactly that, to be able to, what is that? We're very good at crisis intervention. So when there's a crisis, boy, we jump in full bore. We're motivated, we're energized, and we're willing to do anything. But doing that maintenance, that's a hard thing. We start to get complacent, take things for granted, and oh, I think everything's going okay. I don't really need to look into that anymore. But just like the Israelites, manna, you couldn't store manna, right? You had to have it every day. And so having that spiritual maintenance and having that psychological maintenance every day, are just so important to our ability to understand ourselves and to be on a more even keel. So when adversity does hit, our plate isn't like 150% full. So most people are going around in their day because they're not doing much maintenance. Their plate is just full with so much stuff that whenever an odd situation or a curveball comes in, they don't have any room on their plate to manage that situation. But if we're doing spiritual and psychological maintenance, now our plate is only 70% full. Now, so whenever a curveball comes in or a difficult situation or an argument or we don't get our way in something, well, now we have some ability to manage that, to sort through, to apply those principles because we're doing regular maintenance on that, and our emotional volume level is at a nice low part. So our thinking volume is good to be able to, okay, well, let me take a look at this. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I feel out of control, that I don't have as much control in this situation. Okay, well, let me look a little bit deeper in my heart. Why do I think I can control everything? Why do I think I have to control everything? Who gave me control of everything? Who made me king of the universe? What do I have control over? How do I do good with that? What don't I have control over? Why am I trying to control that? Why can't I trust God in those situations that are outside of my control?
What do you think the role is of medication these days? I know that it's more acceptable than it's ever been, but it's still somewhat controversial, especially in the very conservative thinking that God is enough, and if you're really doing it all right, you shouldn't need medicine. And so, what are your thoughts about psychiatric medicine?
Well, yeah, that's a very controversial one in the Christian community. I get asked this at least 5 times a week by whether it's pastors, whether it's patients, everybody in between. What's the positioning of psychiatric medications? So I've been a psychiatrist for 35 years, been prescribing psychiatric medications for that long. I've seen incredible miracles occur. I think psychiatric meds are miracles that God has given us in the natural world to patch the natural decay or deficiency that we have at times. Now, as we talk about treatment, just like we've talked about for the bulk of this hour, the psychological and the spiritual are the most uh, profound elements that affect our brain chemistry, that affect our brain circuits, that affect our psychological and spiritual development. So, whenever I talk about meds, by no means am I saying, "Hey, let's minimize those other two spheres." Those other two spheres are the most important. The problem is that those other two spheres take a while for a person to understand, learn, practice, implement, and for those things to bear fruit. So it might be 2 months, might be 4 months, might be a year to be able to really understand those principles, work with that therapist, dig deep into that unconscious space, unpack certain things, practice skills, have the skills be sort of rote so we're able to do them in our sleep, and now we got fruit. What medications do is they're a temporary patch. I've never seen a psychiatric medication cure any psychiatric illness. So our medical community will say, hey, this is a genetic issue that you have. You're probably born with a genetic loading for it. It's a biological problem. Just take this medication. That's all you need to do, and you'll be cured from it. No psychiatric medication has ever cured any psychiatric problem, but they've been miraculous because they decrease a lot of the symptoms that we have. So whether it's symptoms about poor energy, lack of concentration, lack of appetite, poor sleep, or too much sleep. All those things interfere with our decision making. Remember, the key is being a good, healthy, consistent, godly decision maker. That's going to rewire our brain through neuroplasticity and help our physical body. So we're looking at when are we having trouble making decisions? If we've tried some psychological and spiritual interventions, but we're not making good decisions because we can't concentrate, we can't think clearly, our memory, is having trouble. Well, that's where psychiatric medications can help with some of those symptoms. Is there psychoses? Are there delusions? Are there things interfering with our perspective of things? Sometimes depression or anxiety is like that old character Pigpen in Charlie Brown that had a dirt cloud that surrounded him. Sometimes having depression and anxiety is having like a storm cloud around your head, and it's hard to see life. It's hard to see yourself, hard to see your future, hard to see God clearly. So medications can sort of help you see life a little bit more clearly. Medications also reduce, we're talking about emotional volume. Sometimes that depression, that anxiety, that anger is so intense that it's hard to think clearly. That thinking volume is low. And so, what some psychiatric medications can do is decrease that emotional intensity, whether it's depression, anger, anxiety, fear, hopelessness, guilt, shame. And so, hopefully, with the decreased emotional intensity, now we can think more clearly to be able to apply what we're learning through the Word, through our relationship with God, through help with coaches, counselors, therapists, spouses, whatever in the process. The Whenever people have hypertension, um, if we catch it early and just teach people better skills, better decisions, we can do it without medications, help their blood pressure and cure that. But if we it goes on for 20 years, now they have heart palpitations, chest pain, blurred vision, headaches. Well, they're at risk of their blood pressure causing a stroke or a heart attack. So we give them blood pressure meds. But we don't tell them these blood pressure meds are going to cure your high blood pressure. They don't do that. They're going to bring down your blood pressure. Now you're going to work on skills. You're going to be a better decision maker. You're going to manage stress, forgive, manage conflict, be a better communicator, stop using alcohol, caffeine, nicotine, drugs. You're going to go to sleep at 11 o'clock every night, wake up at 7, get a good 8 hours of sleep. You're going to manage finances better, marriage skills, parenting skills. We never give the person a blood pressure med, say, hey, take this blood pressure med, but don't do anything else to improve your life. Just keep on making the same dysfunctional decisions. We say, hey, you need to make better decisions. But the medication buys us time to learn, practice, incorporate, and bear fruit. And the same with psychiatric medications. A great miracle God's given us. They give a nice patch to some of that defective brain circuitry that buys us time to be able to learn skills in various different ways, because those skills are what's going to bring that psycho-spiritual healing that we need.
I couldn't agree with you more. Just like if I have the flu, I'm really thankful for Theraflu. I'm going to take the flu. It's going to make me feel better so I can function. But if I don't take care of myself and I don't do the work of getting better, it's just mitigating the symptoms. And I think so often we are lied to and told that this is the cure, or this is the problem, and this is the cure. And so I'm so glad that, yes, if I need crutches, I want to use crutches. I don't want to use crutches the rest of my life. I want to strengthen my legs so that I can, get my resilience back. And so I think this is really important if people can take the medication with wisdom and do the work that they need to in order to be able to then eventually not need it anymore. That's the best outcome if possible.
And one of the downsides, like you say, our medical community says, hey, just take this. Just like if you had a cast on your leg, in the beginning, the cast is awesome. It's great. It's very necessary, very important to protect that, leg, arm, to allow healing to occur. But if you leave the cast on too long, right, then the muscles underneath atrophy, and now that leg isn't going to work very well. Now, I'm not talking about the length of time you're on medications, but if you're taking the medications but not working on skills, you're not going to improve. You might get some temporary symptom relief, but you're not going to improve. There was a big court case a number of years ago, and this term Prozac poop out syndrome came about because people were on Prozac for 8 to 10 years. It was the first antidepressant you could safely be on for a long period of time. And then people were having their depression or suicidality return, and they were attributing to Prozac pooping out. Well, Prozac didn't poop out. It's just that the person didn't work on any skills. They were just taking the medication, not growing psychologically, not growing spiritually, but hoping that the medication would just cure all. It doesn't cure all. It patches, it helps temporarily, but if you're not doing the work on the skills, you might have to add a second antidepressant, then a third antidepressant, and eventually you have that heart attack or you have that stroke because on blood pressure meds, but if you're still eating, not exercising, can't manage stress, drinking, smoking, you're going to die of a heart attack.
Carl, just this is on the subject of decision making, but I think that it would be just wonderful to close with this, even though, we all know that God has made us for relationships. Every single one of the 10 commandments have to do with relationships, a relationship with God, a relationship with one another. We are wired to connect. Why are we struggling, even as believers, so much in our relationships?
Yeah, well, to me, I look at Satan. Satan. Boy, Satan is unbelievable. In heaven, there was all these angels with God all the time for probably a long time. Wasn't just a couple years, wasn't a couple months, probably, wasn't even just a couple centuries. They're probably with him a long time. And Satan was able to trick one third of them that were in God's presence for a lot of time, seeing just amazing stuff and being with God, trick them into leaving and to breaking that relationship with God. So I think Satan is behind all this. I think Satan's goal is he doesn't want us to have a relationship with God. He wants us to be out of relationship with God, never understand, never want to engage. So his goal, keeping us out of relationship with God, the trophy that he's after is our soul. So his primary strategy is to distort. He uses lies to distort our understanding of relationships. So whatever the concept is, if it has to do with relationships, Satan wants to trick us into believing something totally different, whether love, sex, money, power, control, intimacy, vulnerability, conflict resolution, connection, you name it. If it has the slightest bit to do with relationship, Satan is distorting it, contaminating it, planting propaganda in our head so that we've been hurt so much in relationships. He wants to obviously attack adults, but he wants to attack adults in a way that interferes with a kid being able to understand relationships. So as a kid grows, when they're greeted with the opportunity of, do you want to have a relationship with God? Satan's goal is for the kid to be so hurt by relationships in the past that, wow, I can't even do relationships in the horizontal space. How in the world can I do a relationship with somebody I can't touch, I can't see, I can't shake hands with, I can't hug? No, thanks. I've been hurt so much by relationships. I don't need one that's really complicated like that. Thankfully, through Christ, from God's love and forgiveness, we're able to come into relationship with God through our faith in Christ. Then Satan's second goal is, well, I've lost their soul, but I'm going to make them as dysfunctional as possible so they can't enjoy their relationship with God and they can't be a light to others, and they might even contaminate other people's understanding of relationship as well. So this whole struggle that we have, even though we're built for relationship, Satan realizes that, and he tries to put out imposters or other things for us to develop relationships with, whether it's pornography, whether it's alcohol, whether it's control, whether it's being a martyr, whether it's people pleasing. There's other things that we get addicted to or develop relationships with or allow them to master us and be our master in particular situations. And he's just incredibly crafty, and evil. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy. The richness that we get, the most richness we get out of life is through relationships. Our relationship with God, a good, healthy relationship with ourselves is very rich, and relationship with others, our spouse, our kids, our loved ones. That's where really the richness of life is all about. And Satan wants to steal, kill, and destroy all that so that we don't enjoy that. And it's about destroying our understanding of anything that has to deal with relationships. And unfortunately, we fall into that trap and we propagate that. It would be nice if Satan said, hey, God, look, I saw Leslie just being born down there. I'm going to let her grow up in an awesome house, two very healthy parents that love each other, care for each other. They provide a nurturing home. She's going to have a couple siblings. They're going to have great relationships together. No sibling rivalry, no jealousy, no fighting, no bickering. You're going to be in a nice, safe neighborhood, have peers that she's able to engage with, have fun with, learn a sport, learn a musical instrument, have success academically. She'll learn how to ride her bike. She'll get her first job. She'll get her license. She'll have some dating experiences that are healthy, that are fun, that are nurturing, that are growing. And when she's 21, she's independent, she's autonomous, she's fully equipped and skilled. Then God, me and you are going to fight for Leslie's soul. But Satan doesn't do that. He'd know he'd probably lose many of those battles. So he starts very early, even when we're in the womb, affecting the mother, our mothers. Am I going to be a good mother? We're going to have enough money. Am I going to know when to get them to the pediatrician? Are we going to live in the right neighborhood for a good school? Am I going to be able to do the right things to raise them to know God? So even those worries cause the secretion of chemicals that cross the placental barrier and affect the brain of the fetus, let alone how he attacks us because we believe in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, and Satan's like, wow, if they believe all those lies, I got a whole bunch of lies I can, that aren't nearly as unreasonable, as Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy that I can throw at them that, they'll suck up and they'll be tricked by.
I can't agree with you more. And I think that, you know, one of the things that we talk to in our population a lot is I think we've made marriage kind of a sacred cow in the church, in that I must be married or I will die. I must have this work or I will die. And so in the abusive population, the abuser is unhealthy and the victim is unhealthy herself. And then they have children, and your children need one healthy parent, at least one. And if you aren't able to do what Karl has talked about, if you're not able to recognize, as much as, for our population, I'm not saying all men are abusers and all women are victims, but we have that population that we speak to. But, if you're not able to say, wow, he is addicted, he does have these issues, and what does that expose in me? I am a people pleaser. I am over functioning. I am an enabler. Oh my gosh, there's work I have to do. Instead of trying to focus on him, to focus on you, so that you are allowing God to use this experience for at least one of you to get healthier. Hopefully both of you, but at least one of you, because your children do need one healthy parent.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, that's we see our society really struggling, and it's amazing how we don't think that kids learn anything until they're 6 years old, and then we put them into school. But kids are soaking up, their sponges for all this stuff, and it's amazing how just a little bit of a turn, just like a little bit of negative stuff, can put them in a negative spiral and plant a lot of unhealthy seeds and decision stuff. But just doing some healthy things, just engaging, being attuned with your kids, being able to empathize, just connecting with them. It's amazing the gains that you can make in just a short period of time. Kids will really soak up any of that positivity, that nurturing, that connecting with them, that attuning to them and their emotions, wanting to help them out, just snuggling with them. They're a sponge. All their brain circuits, are thirsty for connection and thirsty for having somebody love them and having somebody connect with them. So even just a little bit of that you can do, just moving that needle just a little bit, it's amazing how kids will soak that up and respond to that in powerful ways. I used to run adolescent units, and it's amazing, kids coming from incredibly broken homes and situations, and just getting some of that nurturing from our staff. It's amazing how much brighter they became, and their parents would come in 10 days later. It's like, wow, is that my kid? They look really really different. I can't believe that they have this kind of brightness to them, this kind of positivity. They're always so glum, and they're always kicking the dirt and have negative attitude and cuss words here. But it's amazing with just a little bit of positivity what that can look like.
Karl, would you close us in prayer for women and men who are listening to this and saying, wow, I have some work to do for myself? It's really easy to figure out what somebody else's work is to do, but knowing that I have my own work to do to get healthier and be the woman or the man that I want to be. Could you pray for us?
Yeah. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for all your love. We thank you for all your grace. We thank you that your grace is grace, and it doesn't. It's not based on what we do and what we merit, but you just continue to shower us with your grace. We just feel bad that we sometimes take it for granted and we don't steward it well. Um, we're in a fallen world. There's a lot of destruction. There's a lot of hurts. There's a lot of wounds, and I just pray for the listeners that I know you have a great comeback story for everybody. You did in my life, and you've blessed me to be involved in many other people's, as you have Leslie to help them walk into their comeback story. I know you have a comeback story for each one of the listeners, but in order for us to walk in it, we have to give up control of what we're trying to control, of thinking that we know the right thing. A lot of times, because of the hurts, because of the wounds, whether we've been a perpetrator or whether been a victim, or we've been both most of the time, that we often think that we know exactly what we need, and we're the only one that can protect us from future hurt and future difficulties. But we know that you have a plan, that you have skills that you want to give us, that a calling that you have on our life, that you have an incredible comeback story that you want us to share with others, to be a superpower that will help impact even other people in their lives. And so I just pray that an understanding for what is that 1% step that I can take today, that you will show them, you reveal to them. Um, Please give them realistic expectations. So many times we have such unrealistic expectations of how fast we have to move, how much good we have to do to make up for past failures, past shame, past guilt. Please give them just realistic expectations and people in their life that can affirm those realistic expectations and can affirm the movement and the progress that they do make, and give them a heart that yearns for you, that is humble to your plan and your guidance. Bring wise people into their space, that understand these situations, um, that don't ridicule them, that don't shame them for some of the struggles that they have, but really engage them with where they're at and what they're struggling with, to be able to be a good coach and a good guide in that process, and give them time and space in their lives, whether it's they're busy, give them an opportunity to simplify. I've never seen people simplify their lives and it work out poorly. You've always been so gracious in doing that for people. So I just ask you for wisdom for them, and to show them a vision of how they can simplify some things in their life, to now be open to some of the work and some of the self-care psychologically and spiritually that you want them to do, to be able to walk in that healing and amazing power that you have for them in the future. Please be with us all. Thank you for this time. Thank you for Leslie and just her gifts and skills, and how you've used her over the years. I thank you for our friendship. I pray for the listeners, and please keep all our kids safe. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. And we'll put some contact information in the show notes if somebody needs to visit Honey Lake Clinic or anything like that. That would be great.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Leslie. Great being with you again.
Thanks, Karl.
Thank you so much for listening today. Friend, we have so much more to share with you. Go right now to leslievernick.com/story and register for Leslie's free workshop December 5th. She's offering it at 2 different times, noon and 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Learn how to rewrite your story, even if life is a mess right now. We want you to know there is hope for your life. So go to leslievernick.com/story and take that first, very important step.